So as we are pulling up the slides, just the agenda is we'll have two rounds of interventions from our panelists. The first, we will look at the opportunities that the panelists and the organizations working in Uzbekistan see in the top cotton textile clusters. And the second are areas of improvement that they still continue to see. And before I really invite our distinguished panelists, I'll take few moments to provide you a brief background and context about the cotton textile clusters in Uzbekistan. And if we pull up the slides, of course, we can see the structure, but just as a way of background, the Uzbekistan cotton textile cluster system has been in place since 2017. It was first introduced, after the state monopoly was taken out. In the beginning, we had 17 clusters, and currently, I mean, as of 2022, Uzbekistan has 134 active cotton textile clusters. What are these cotton textile clusters? These are private entities that are vertically integrated from farms to the cut and sew or to yarn, or to even textile production. So some cotton textile clusters have backward linkages from farm to yarn, some have from farm to cut and sew, and they also export the finished goods. In some cases, the clusters own the farms, also called direct farming, or they buy from farmers under contract farming. The cluster structure provides a unique position to Uzbekistan as a sourcing country. And as it has vertically integration, it is vertically integrated and a potential for full supply chain traceability. You can imagine, with the new legislations coming in on full value chain, Uzbekistan can provide to be a good solution when it comes to upstream supply chain traceability. I mean, based on just FLA's work in various countries, we find Uzbekistan has one of the most comprehensive paper-based trail on cotton movement from farm to cut and sew facilities. In terms of the efforts that have been made so far, both the individual clusters as well as many different organizations are making efforts to improve market linkages, they have investments, and you can see on the right of the screen with new technology, transportation routes, diversification, traceability. The purpose is to attract Western buyers to source from Uzbekistan. But as we can also imagine that all these companies and buyers have requirements and code of conduct around working conditions, around monitoring, around remediation. And one of the key requirements for all these companies is really the application of human rights due diligence program, and including effective grievance mechanism. So today on the webinar, what we are going to do is explore some of these topics and listen to various perspectives from our expert panelists who have been engaging on these topics for years. So I'll now turn to our panelists to introduce them, and I'll ask them questions around their current work. So really the first, first I would like to bring in Reluka, to the conversation from Cotton Campaign. Reluka is a labor rights specialist focused on global cotton supply chains. She has experience in corporate accountability campaign, policy advocacy, labor rights research, training development, and she currently is the coordinator at the Cotton Campaign. Before joining Cotton Campaign, Reluka was part of the team coordinating and monitoring the implementation of Bangladesh Accord, which is, as you might know, a legally binding agreement with over 200 global apparel brands and trade unions to improve factory safety. So to Reluka, I mean, where you sit in terms of with the Cotton Campaign, with your work with Accord, and also looking at the emerging international regulatory environment, what, according to you, do you see as the opportunities for workers and buyers in the existing environment that we operate now? Rich.
Hi, Richard. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me well? I guess so. Okay, thanks. And of course, thanks for hosting this super timely and important webinar. Thanks for the question, really important. Just let me first, before really diving into the opportunities that we see in Uzbekistan, if I can quickly, just a few minutes, introduce the Cotton campaign, maybe for those that are watching us and are not familiar with our work. Thanks. So we are a global coalition of organizations. You can see here on the slide, we bring together not just NGOs and independent trade unions, but also investors and brand associations, and in particular, 2 US brand associations. And for over 10 years, we as the Cotton Campaign, we maintained a pledge, a commitment, which was signed by over 330 companies that had committed to not source Uzbek cotton as long as it was produced with systemic state-imposed forced labor. And that pledge, or the boycott, as it's mostly referred to in Uzbekistan, was lifted in 2022 as Uzbekistan eliminated systemic state-imposed forced labor in cotton. And here on the slide, you can see some of the photos from the press conference where we made this announcement right in Tashkent jointly with high-level Uzbek government representatives. And now just to say, following this incredible achievement, we continue engaging with the Uzbek government, with the Uzbek industry and global brands and our brand pledge signatories to encourage responsible sourcing from the country, which we view as the obvious next step for the industry. And if we can go to the next slide, in her introduction, Risha already alluded, right, to the increasingly strict legal environment that brands must navigate today. And I'll briefly describe this, and then I'll explain why this is actually an important opportunity for the textile sector in Uzbekistan. So first and foremost, brands need to make sure that their cotton supply chains are first fully traceable to the raw material levels, and second, they are free of forced labor and exploitative working conditions at all stages of production. And to do this, brands conduct human rights due diligence. We're all aware of the concept, in order to identify risks in their supply chains and address them. And for these steps to be successful, for the due diligence steps, so in order to be able to identify, prevent, mitigate, and account for risks in supply chains, brands need credible and independent monitoring and reporting on labor violations. And they also need worker-centered grievance mechanisms at every level of their supply chains. And I'm sure many of you watching us now know that many brands had already incorporated these processes, these practices in their supply chains. But now, in the last few years, this has actually become a legal obligation for companies in the countries where they import their products. And here on the slide, I listed, a brief list of legislation that's in force or it's upcoming in places like the US, the EU, Canada, or other jurisdictions. And I won't go into detail about what each legislation requires, but I think what's important here to remember from this, and in particular, what's important for the Uzbek stakeholders that are watching this webinar to remember is really that brands in this time and age are facing big risks, financial risks, legal risks, and reputational risks if they don't ensure that their supply chains are free of forced and exploitative labor. And if we can move to the next slide, I think really, I gave that brief introduction. The question is really, why does this matter, right? Like, why are we talking about the brand's obligations while this session is focused on Uzbek textile clusters? And I think there are two important answers to that question. And first, it's because, again, like I said before, it's important for the Uzbek government and industry to start building a solid knowledge of the global landscape for supply chains. and to take steps to address the remaining human rights risks in the industry to make the industry attractive to global brands. And we'll discuss this a bit more in detail in my second part of the presentation, where I'll be addressing the challenges for sourcing from Uzbekistan. But the second reason why understanding the legal and global landscape for supply chains is really because this increasingly stringent landscape actually creates a level playing field among the company's practices. And in turn, that really creates an opportunity to shape the textile industry in Uzbekistan from scratch. And here's the opportunity to shape it into what I called on this slide, not just a win-win situation for all actors, but a win-win-win situation for all three major actors in the Uzbek supply chain. And again, Risha alluded to this in her introduction when she mentioned the vertical integration of the textile sector in Uzbekistan, that specifically that piece, really provides brands with unprecedented opportunities for full traceability, opportunities for full transparency of labor practices at all stages of production. So the potential benefits for companies for sourcing from Uzbekistan are huge. Uzbekistan could really become the go-to place for sourcing of sustainable textiles if all the conditions are in place. So we have the brands, and then if we encourage responsible sourcing, so sourcing in accordance with the legal requirements in the global north that I just mentioned, that would give Uzbek suppliers, and I'm talking about Uzbek clusters, but also other suppliers outside of the cluster system in Uzbekistan, that would give them the opportunity to create long-term, robust business relationships with global brands. And in turn, that would really enable workers and farmers in the Uzbek textile industry to exercise their rights to freedom of association, rights to collective bargaining, and continue improving their working conditions on an ongoing basis. So I think the big question really is, now, how do we seize this opportunity? How do we make sure that we develop an industry that benefits all the actors? And again, this is a bit more what I'll be focusing on in the second part of my presentation, when the main points are really, the fact that some human rights risks still remain in the industry, that the Uzbek government and industry need to further reinforce reform so that we maintain momentum for responsible sourcing. And also, again, what's key for the brands to get out of this, to learn from this presentation, is that now it's really a unique chance for them to help shape a new industry from scratch, which can really be at the forefront of worker-led labor rights compliance.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you, Raluca. That's a perfect start to the conversation. And you have said it so well. It's not a choice anymore for companies. And let's see this as an opportunity. And this is a very good segue where I would like to invite Mr. Ikram Kadyrov from the Uzbek Textile and Garment Industry Association, who is with us. He's the chairman of the association and has over 25 years of great experience in cotton and textile industry, starting in 1992 at the State Foreign Trade Company under the Ministry of Foreign Economic Relations. He has international experience in cotton trade while working with for more than 2 years as director of Uzbek Swiss marketing company Ugdun in Geneva. He has also served twice in diplomatic positions, first as a commercial counselor at the Embassy of Republic of Uzbekistan to Benelux country and mission to the European communities in Belgium, then as the ambassador of the Republic of Uzbekistan to Ukraine. So we are very excited to have you. And really, I think what would be great, Mr. Kadyrov, if you could reflect on how you see the industry in terms of ongoing reforms in Uzbekistan in the past 5 years, if you could talk about the local initiatives that the industry has taken, and what's your pitch to the companies, when it comes to you are ready?
Thank you very much, Ms. Mittal. It is very encouraging conversation, and I you make my job a little easier because yourself and Raluca already described a lot about our initiative. I'm very excited that already international society quite well aware about development in Uzbekistan, and the best development was that we get rid of those pledge, and now we are open. But I would like to add here that we've been not just sitting and waiting until this pledge will be out. We've been preparing ourselves to work on this international market. We know that the brands, it is not only about pledge, they will go even more deeper. And now our international partners, including Cotton Campaign, GIZ, they're helping us, or Better Cotton, they're helping us to be on the same level or the same standard as international brands are demanded. Few words about what do we have. Yes, you mentioned about that in 2022 we have 134 clusters. Now we have, in last year we have 142, but this year it would be even more because as per demand of our international partner, we make a thing that no cluster can monopolize anything. So now farmers are free to sell their seed cotton to any cluster or any textile mill, which will be nominated as a cluster. We are quite big as a cotton producer. We are planting million hectares of cotton. We have increased our export. It is 3.4 billion last year. Of course, last year was not very supportive price-wise. You can ask any textile person that last year we are all declined, but we managed to keep our dynamic to increase. It is already 570,000 direct employed people in the chain. So it is also quite encouraging figure. So many people are involved. We become part of Better Work. I know Yusuf is around, and we become part of Better Cotton program also. I believe Corinne will describe a little more, just mentioning here. We are expanding horizon. So we are intervening with this system of cotton textile cluster to Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Tajikistan. Even we have a signal that we could go even to Afghanistan. We know this country is cotton growing country also, so it could be this kind of reform could make them also more efficient and more market oriented. We have a product change, so I believe that this is our strengths, which is already said. We have a yarn, all type of yarn, so we can enter to the global supply chain at any place. We can enter at the yarn wise, we can enter at the fabric or with the product itself. So we produce any all outwear, including denim, home textile. We are very strong on knitwear. Of course, we have a quite good potential on hosiery also. And our advantages is we are vertically integrated. It is very rightly mentioned, some of our clusters goes up until yarn, some of them goes up until garment. We have a proximity, and what is good, we have a free trade market regime with CIS countries, and with EU we have a GSP+. It makes us very competitive in those markets. We have a possibility to reduce the costing. We already managed to relocate some of the brand to Uzbekistan because of the cost factor. They have a production in Europe or elsewhere. They moved to Uzbekistan. I will name some of them. For example, Cotonella from Italy or Leinhandrik from Germany. They moved their production to Uzbekistan, now happily producing in Uzbekistan and using our advantages. We have a quite responsible production, and I will say more about it a little further. Next slide, if you can show us. Slide. Okay, anyway, nevertheless, the slide will show that we are pushing for sustainability. We are pushing for traceability. This is our strong point. It was already mentioned, because we are from the field to the customer shelf. We are also introducing some organic cotton, which makes us even more visible. For example, our Our partner in Japan, they keep requesting organic product, and our partners in France also, they're saying that organic side of our production would be more preferable. We are pushing for circularity with pre-production and post-production waste, and we are making water-saving technology in all chain, including, for example, in cotton production, we are already more than 200,000 hectares under this water-saving technology. You could see here a diagram with the digital thing. It means that we touched also so-called cotton blockchain. We introduced German DNA, and we make this T-shirt nicely. I have to make special thanks to all our partners, which was involved to make us visible. This is, first of all, GIZ, of course, and UNEC. These two organizations help us a lot. We become part of the Sustainability Pledge and United Nations Global Compact. So it makes us more visible to the brand. And of course, we hope we will keep doing this in the future in order to, as you requested, how we see us in the coming years. We are pushing for all compliances very seriously, including, for example, we are working with the cotton campaign regarding responsible sourcing network. We are open for those things also. If any of our partner brand will request certain thing, we are ready to meet them. For example, we know what is good for all brands. It sounds better cotton and better work. So that is why we put a lot of efforts in this particular two program, because for us it looks like more mostly welcomed program out of brands. But you could see here ISO, SEDEX, or BSI, or even RAP. This last year, 20 Uzbek exporters received RAP certificate, so it makes us visible even in US market. Next slide. Next slide will show that it is not only our recognition, but our labor standard was recognized. Raluca already mentioned that in 10th of March 22, Cotton Campaign recognized ILO. Today, this morning, we have a very interesting session with ILO. We keep communicating with them to increase. We have a special legal acts adopted in order to meet international conventions and protocols. This is some of the letters or statements, not from us, but from international. So, of course, I could say only glorious story, but it is not only me who are saying this word. I am sure that we have unique opportunities in Uzbekistan, and it was very well recognized by our partners. And next slide. We are not stopping at this level. We are not stopping at this level. We would like to introduce new initiative in order to be even more attractive. It was already said that we are attractive as a traceable, as a sustainable, but now we are pushing socially responsible cotton textile. This is going to be wider explored. We discussed this initiative with ICAC, this International Cotton Advisory Committee. We're discussing this with ITMF, International Textile Manufacturer Federation, because we feel that cotton itself and cotton textile in particular under very big scrutiny in order with the compliances of work labor rights or environment. That is why we are trying to make it more welcomed product, because I'm always saying that all of us sitting in this webinar wearing something from natural fibers, would it be cotton or wool or silk. But you should know that the production of those natural fiber are limited, and it is very challenging. That is why I believe that producers at any place of this chain has to be remunerated properly, or it has to be properly paid eventually, properly priced. That is why we are pushing this initiative internationally. We are using your very comprehensive platform to announce about it. So this is just a brief introduction about this initiative. We will spread it more wider with the time will pass. And on the last my slide, I would like to welcome and invite all of you to International Textile Manufacturer Federation annual meeting and International Apparel Federation annual meeting, which will be going to be in Samarkand, 8 and 10 of September this year. With this, I would like to thank you and welcome you to Uzbekistan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kadyrov. It seems Uzbekistan is open-minded, open for collaboration, open for advice, and also just not playing a role for yourself, but also trying to educate the region and the countries around you. And you, of course, introduced the two partners that multiple partners. So I would like to bring in Better Cotton now and Corinne Wood-Jones to talk a little bit about also the upstream supply chain traceability and farm level due diligence. But just before that, Corinne joined Better Cotton in 2013 and is the director for special projects, supporting priority areas linked to the organization's long-term objectives and strategic direction. He has a career spanning commercial as well as non-for-profit organizations with over 20 years of direct engagement in key areas of the cotton sector. Corinne, we're very happy to have you here. And again, going back straight into the question on how do you see, from Better Cotton perspective, the upstream supply chain traceability and farm level due diligence? Luca talked about that a little bit. It's a conducive environment, and if done right, if human rights and labor rights are respected. So from your point of view, how do you see it?
Thank you very much for the introduction. So let me just give a quick bit of context for those that are not fully familiar with Better Cotton. So we're a global cotton sustainability initiative, currently accounting for around 22% of cotton volumes. And we have a field level standard which outlines the requirements that currently more than 2.2 million farmers met in the 21-22 season. And the scale of our work means that we're able to drive a positive impact in cotton growing regions around the world. Coming to Uzbekistan specifically, we actually launched our program formally in 2022, so fairly recently, and we established a branch office in Tashkent. So we now have a small team in country who are dedicated to driving developments in country. And these more recent developments followed on from very significant earlier efforts, which were made by the International Finance Corporation, who I want to mention, IFC, and specifically GIZ, who began piloting the implementation of the Better Cotton principles and criteria as far back as 2017, and which provided the foundation for us as an organization to then commence our own direct engagement in country. And just to give you a little bit of a flavor of where we are right now, the first season of our Better Cotton program, we were able to engage with 6 large farms, which fell under the purview of 3 clusters, which were described to us earlier by Risha. And in the most recent 23-24 season, we've seen the program double in size to 12 farms under the management of 6 clusters. So we're sort of moving forward. I mean, addressing the bigger picture, I mean, we as Better Cotton see our work as an opportunity to fulfill the role of proactively driving a range of improvements for the environment, producers, and workers in the country's cotton sector. So, this is all to bring us a little bit closer to our vision of a world where all cotton is being grown in a more sustainable way. And I think, through our efforts in Uzbekistan, and by working together in a strong multi-stakeholder environment, which comprises government, industry, civil society, and especially from our perspective, cotton farmers, who represent the primary focal point of our mission, we have a great opportunity to contribute to increasing transparency and integrity within the Uzbek cotton sector, building upon the tremendous progress which has already been made to date and which was sort of outlined to us by Raluca and by Mr. Kadyrov. So I think, you know, we've already seen to date that Uzbekistan is providing a good example of how meaningful and committed multi-stakeholder engagement can rapidly and concretely lead to positive developments. And of course, as the you know, the sixth, depending on the year, largest cotton growing nation globally, operations in Uzbekistan are sort of quite intrinsic, I would say, and quite tied into our goal of mainstreaming more sustainable cotton production, and certainly offers the opportunity of huge potential. Coming on to sort of concrete actions, which I think might be of interest to the audience that we have today. In June of last year, we launched a roadmap for sustainability developments to drive further improvements in the country's cotton sector. Uzbekistan's state chairperson and chairperson of the National Commission to Combating Human Trafficking and Forced Labor, Her Excellency Tanzila Nabieva, as well as Uztextilprom. We have Mr. Kadyrov here with us today. We're amongst signatories to this collaborative agreement. And to advance the aims of the roadmap, national stakeholders have committed, and this is important, they've made a commitment to supporting its implementation. And this also extends into the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Employment, Textile and Garments Association, amongst others. And this roadmap provides all of us with a detailed action plan through which progress will be assessed in line with 4 overarching objectives. And these objectives, which I think are good for all of us to understand, are firstly to build effective management systems for the Better Cotton Programme in Uzbekistan and raise awareness among cotton stakeholders in the country on sustainability pillars. Secondly, it is to promote the labour rights of workers in the cotton sector by putting in place effective labour systems that ensure decent work, safe and healthy working environments, effective management of employer-worker relations, as well as productive social dialogue. Thirdly, we're looking at building key stakeholders' awareness of best practices relating to environmental sustainability in cotton production and how these can be assessed credibly at a field level. And fourthly, we're looking to build a 3-year strategy that defines the way in which the Better Cotton Programme can be managed, critically funded and delivered at the scale which we all want to see. And this roadmap will include in its approach recommendations by Better Cotton on how cotton growing communities across Uzbekistan can adopt more sustainable practices that are better for the environment, for their communities and for the economy as a whole. So just dipping briefly into traceability as well, which I know is one of the questions that you had for me, Risha. Uzbekistan's recently privatized cotton industry, as we heard, is organized under vertically integrated businesses, the so-called clusters. And you know, we see this as being sort of highly conducive to being able to trade cotton at scale. You know, we've seen already that through trials conducted by us in the last year, Better Cotton can already effectively be traced from the farm level through to manufacturing stages. So I think, you know, unlike many other countries where we operate, Uzbekistan is actually in a relatively unique position to demonstrate effective and credible traceability. So from our perspective, I would say that is perhaps one of the least challenging areas that we have to look at as an organization. And I'll pause there. Thank you, Risha.
Okay. Thank you, Corinne, and you have laid it out very succinctly with the 4 things that need to be done, and I'm excited to see how it goes. And you've talked, of course, at the farm level, and now I want to shift gears a little bit and go to Yusuf with the ILO Better Work Program, who primarily work at the enterprise level. So before I go and ask the question, just as a way of introduction, Abu Yusuf is with the ILO since 2017. He currently leads the Better Work program in Uzbekistan. And before that, Yusuf has managed the Better Work operations in Bangladesh, also strategizing the strategy for better work from 2022 to 27, and with a very strong focus on advancing decent work through multi-sectoral collaboration, and elevating the enterprise level better work results to the institutional and sectoral level, and with strong alignment with ILO's support to strengthening labor market governance. He has previously worked with GIZ, so bringing a lot of experience, into Uzbekistan. So Yusuf, coming back to the enterprise level, and knowing the Better Work program, you conduct enterprise level assessments, they're Better Work factories, you work in multiple countries. In the context of Uzbekistan, do you see this transparency in terms of reporting? Because as you can imagine, many stakeholders are looking at it. And also, what support can international institution provide when it comes to national policy discussions, and also based on data? So how can policy be made which is data driven? And I think that's one of the questions also already in chat, how the role that the policymakers can play. So if you could talk from ILO perspective, that would be great.
Thank you so much, Richa, and good afternoon to everyone in this event. I've been in Uzbekistan for already 7 months. So I will talk about a little bit on my day-to-day discussion and interaction with the stakeholder here in Uzbekistan, also colleague from enterprises, government, and also trade union representative. So we see a lot of opportunity towards making Uzbekistan as one of the trusted sourcing partner for international brand. But I would like to discuss a couple of in this discussion, which will reflect my interaction and actual discussion with the constituent here. So I will start with from ILO perspective. I think as you mostly know that Uzbekistan has ratified 9 out of 10 fundamental ILO convention. And also recently, as Mr. Haider also mentioned in his speech, that recently government also going through some reform around labor law, which will be more compliant with international standard. So these sort of changes and also movement in sectoral and policy level has already created a good set of mindsets at the enterprise level. So it's really easy for us to go to the enterprise and look for specific information on worker right, safety, workplace cooperation, and freedom of association and collective bargaining. Because since from the higher level and policy level, this has already been ratified and discussed, it is easy for us to collect all those information. So that I see as a good opportunity towards building a compliance culture at the enterprise level. Secondly, I will also go back to the point on cluster composition here. I think since we have this integration, particularly integration of culture cluster, that's also a good positive, because when I interact with our colleagues and workers in the enterprise, I see most of them are actually living very close to the enterprises. So there is already a natural bonding between the worker and also the manager of the enterprises and even owner of the enterprises. So I think with having this kind of natural bonding already established because of their setting, there's also prioritize the worker welfare when it comes to the workplace collaboration and working condition. I think we can further establish on that with its set of framework in terms of ILO labor standard and specific framework. We can work further on that. And then I think Raluca rightly mentioned, we see also some sort of campaign now going on is go to Uzbekistan can be one of the go-to place for international brands and buyer. But what is actually protecting them to come in Uzbekistan now at this moment? Because all these brands now looking at how we are establish a partnership among all different partner working on decent work in the cluster and also industry. And that what they are now looking for is a trusted partner for traceability and also managing their supply chain risks in regard to compliance. So we from Betterworks side can be one of the partners, because we are based on our support, as Richa, you mentioned. We are also collecting data on non-compliance or even compliance data from the enterprises that can help to the potential brands coming to Uzbekistan to see and understand compliance level of the industry, and they can build based on that data with quality. They can also decide on their commercial decision on the business. I think that's where we can play as a complementary role with enterprises, also with the stakeholder here in Uzbekistan, be as a partner for learning, and also be as a partner to produce a traceability and also risk management tools and technique that will also satisfy the international standard and requirement along with level standard. Last but not least, I think one of the, if you look into the discussion happening around the world, due to many geopolitical reasons and also for economical reason, many of the brands now looking for a new partner for sourcing their goods and services. And we also have a discussion based on our partnership with many brands in the world, likes of H&M, CNA, and Lidl, Disney. They all are looking at how things are forming in Uzbekistan. I think everyone is looking for a good result and a story. I think with all the support from the enterprises and also from the stakeholder here, if we can build up a nice and good case study and a narrative to tell as a good story to the external partner and also specifically the international brand, they will be more comfortable to come in Uzbekistan and also do their business for coming months and year. And that's where I think Betterworks can play a role as a part of ILO program and also a partner from IFC and also World Bank. We can set some sort of a standard and system in place that will allow industry to produce their data that can be used for decision maker from the initial brand to do business in Uzbekistan. At the same time, this kind of train of data and compliance can be given to the policymaker to strategize their policy more specific to the need of the industry and the compliance train. I think I would stop here. Back to you, Richa. Thank you.
Thank you, Abu. And I think what you meant, I think ILO has a critical role to play. I mean, because you have this fantastic tripartite structure where you absolutely work with the government, the employers organization, and also the workers. And as organizations who are, who know the ILO's work, we really look forward to, how you will scale this up and how you will bring the social dialogue component to this whole discussion. So a lot of people on the call today have talked about decent work. And what I like to do is to bring in Nisha Tirumalai from the Fair Labor Association, my colleague, wonderful colleague. And what we have been doing is work in grievance mechanism. So it's really a subset of the whole decent work program to really put workers at the center of these discussions and to look at worker voice. So before I ask her the question, just as a way of introduction, Nisha is the project manager with the Agriculture and Supply Chain Innovation team. And she has been with the FLA for 3 years. She actually leads the FLA's work on enhancing grievance mechanism in the cotton-textile clusters in Uzbekistan. This is a project we have at GIZ. And prior to working with the FLA, Nisha was with the ILO leading the decent work in the rubber glove supply chain in Malaysia. So Nisha, the question really is, when it comes to enterprise level grievance mechanism, where do you think the opportunities are, and what has been your experience around worker voice and grievance mechanisms?
Yeah, thanks, Richa. Before I begin talking about our work on grievance mechanism in Uzbekistan, just a very brief introduction to the FLA for those who are hearing about us for the first time. So the Fair Labor Association is a multi-stakeholder nonprofit organization, and we work with businesses, universities, and also civil society organizations. And the core of our work is to protect and promote workers' rights and also improving working conditions globally. So we started our work on improving grievance mechanisms in the cotton textile sector in Uzbekistan in 2021, funded by GIZ. So what we really did was, in the beginning, we did a stakeholder engagement. We talked to relevant stakeholders in Uzbekistan to understand existing systems that are in place and what are the gaps. And at the same time, we also did a baseline assessment with a pilot of 3 clusters to understand their existing grievance mechanism and to understand the gaps that would then help us develop our intervention. So throughout January 2022 up until December 2022, we did a series of activities with these clusters, which I will go into later, just to give you a brief timeline at this point. And we concluded the project for phase 1 at the end of March 2023, where we did an online assessment. And because of the successful implementation of phase 1, we wanted to scale up, and we have now started phase 2, which is building local capacity. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right, just a very brief explanation on what we did in phase 1. We did a series of management training at the cluster level. So we introduced an effective grievance mechanism based on the UNGP effectiveness criteria. We explained to them the importance of having social dialogue, worker inclusion, and how to actually handle grievances. And then we developed an action plan based on the baseline assessment that we conducted, and we continued to engage with the cluster, which then led us to our second training, which is at the cluster level, training brigade leaders. So why we trained brigade leaders was that throughout the assessment, the baseline interviews, we found out that workers actually trust the brigade leaders more than the existing grievance protocol put in place by the enterprise. They are more comfortable with their brigade leaders, so the brigade leaders are always the first point of contact when workers, farmers would like to, put forward a grievance. So which was really important that we build the capacity of the brigade leaders, introduce them to the criteria of a grievance mechanism, and just make them understand how they can handle grievances effectively as well. And we also provided expert advice, bilateral engagement, in person, online. We continued our engagement and followed up with the clusters to understand what are their challenges in closing some of the gaps identified, and what are the resources they may need, what are the help they may need from us in terms of, putting the action plan into implementation mode. So we also helped develop a couple of tools and templates, because one of the things that we've identified is that it's not that the clusters lack a grievance mechanism, it lacked a functioning grievance mechanism. We found out that almost all of the clusters that we've worked with had the exact same template for a grievance mechanism. So it was really just one template shared across all the clusters, and they may or may not know how to implement that grievance mechanism. So what we did was, if you could go into the next slide, please. So what we did was, training was one thing, but then we also developed several other resources to help them sort of identify the different types of grievances and how do you handle these cases separately, and how to include workers as well. For example, we introduced the escalation pathway procedures. What we saw was that a lot of cases were dealt there and then. There was no proper escalation pathway for the grievances. So we introduced that escalation pathways to the clusters, and we also introduced a traffic light grievance management procedure, which is a very simple document to help them understand what are the kinds of grievances that are high risk or in terms of severity, and how do you handle those kind of grievances. And what are the type of grievances that are, medium risk and low risk, and, how immediately do you have to deal with these grievances, and what are the, whether it requires investigation or not, and whether it requires external experts or third-party involvement. So we also talk about how they need to do worker profiling at the farm level. That this is just so enterprises understand their workforce to manage risk. Talking about risk, we also then introduce how to conduct risk assessment processes at the cotton farms. We did this with the workers, and it's a mix of workers and management. So they can start including workers into their risk assessment process at the cluster level. So can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so phase 2 is really some of the opportunities that we've seen from implementing phase 1. It's a mix of, some of the gaps that we have turned into opportunities. So we've created all of these wonderful resources for the cluster. So we wanted to share it with a broader group. So that's our plan and strategy for phase 2. And we also want to scale the trainings for brigade leaders because, again, since they are the, first point of contact for workers, we feel like we need to continue building the capacity of brigade leaders. And really just because of the cluster system, we see this as a great opportunity for Uzbekistan because there is that potential to have a centralized oversight in terms of implementation and compliance. Now, if you look at it, because of the cluster system, it allows for a unified cluster level framework that can be implemented across the cotton production process. And this will also sort of make stakeholder engagement so much easier in a sense where enterprises then don't have to do it on their own alone. As we know, stakeholder engagement is a very important aspect in an effective grievance mechanism. So having just that enterprise level structure would make that so much easier. And of course, worker involvement and escalation pathway was also another area that was really important that we wanted to work on. A lot of these grievance mechanisms that were developed did not include workers' voice in on whether or not it's feasible for them. So we wanted to introduce that as well. And also, of course, escalation to third parties where the enterprise do not have the capacity to deal with these situations on their own. And lastly, I wanted to also say that this was a key point for phase 2, which is building local capacity. What we've realized is that there's a lot of untapped talent in Uzbekistan. And throughout phase 1, we've realized that with the hand-holding, with the constant engagement with the clusters, with the one-on-one session with the clusters, they were able to close the gaps identified better because there is someone helping them along the way and they know what to do, providing them with the advice, with the resources they need. At one cluster, it was almost 100% closure on all gaps identified. In 2 other clusters, it was 95% closure of the gaps identified. So we realized this is an effective way to help clusters to, improve their grievance mechanism. But then given the number of clusters, it's not a sustainable way to have an organization such as FLA to continue doing that individually with each of the clusters. So we feel like the best way forward is to build a local capacity so that we can reach to a point where Uzbekistan would no longer need to rely on external organizations to help them, and they can rely on their own talent to help them make the changes and improvements they need in terms of human rights due diligence. I'll just pause here.
Thank you, Nisha. And as Nisha said, one-to-one engagement is absolutely critical. That's the way we proceeded. And now we, of course, will rely on the industry associations, larger associations to build that local capacity. And I'm now going to turn to Gina. Gina goes last, but it definitely has the most powerful, voice and also the work that they have been doing. So Gina, Burgar is currently the project lead for the global program for sustainability and value added in agriculture supply chains, cotton in Uzbekistan with the GIZ. The project is working along the whole supply chain to increase the sustainability of cotton economy in Uzbekistan. And before Gina joined the GIZ, she worked in corporate responsibility. So she really knows how the private sector works, working with the German food and textile retailer, and also as a strategy consultant in the field of corporate responsibility. And our specific focus is on sustainable supply chains and agriculture raw materials, mainly in the field of consumer goods and textiles. So Gina, you have heard about all of these different players, and somehow GIZ is involved with each one of them. So what I would like to, ask from you is how important you think these multi-stakeholder collaborations are. What is the importance of capacity building? How do we look at market linkages with your experience in Uzbekistan?
Yeah, thank you very much, Richard, also for the nice introduction. So honestly, my voice is not so powerful today, but I hope you can still hear me quite clearly, and I hope it will also not break. Sorry in advance if it happens. So yeah, you already introduced me, and I think most of you also know GIZ, but just in case, we are a German service provider in the field of international cooperation for sustainable development and international education work, with over 50 years of experience in a wide range of areas, including economic development, employment promotion, but also energy, environment, and a lot more. Our main commissioning party is the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, and this is also the commission of our project that I'm going to shortly introduce to you and that you see on the slide here. So our project here in Uzbekistan started actually in 2019, and we are working along the whole supply chain of cotton and textile production in order to increase the sustainability and the potential for local value addition in Uzbekistan by promoting sustainable cultivation of cotton, strengthening sustainable capacities for local value addition here in the country, and also fostering global knowledge exchange. Our most important partners here are the Ministry of Agriculture and the Textile Association Uztextilprom, you just heard from Mr. Haidarov, and our project will last until March 2025. So on the next slide, I would like to highlight some of the activities that we are conducting along the whole supply chain of cotton. So from cotton cultivation to the export of the ready-made textiles and garments. The focus of all our activities is on capacity building. And herein, as just mentioned, we cooperate with different organizations, and some of them are also part of the panel here. So we kind of try to bring it all together. I would just like to highlight some activities in the different areas. So let's start with the cotton production, where we are working on different international standards and concepts to improve the sustainability of the cultivation of cotton. We are, for example, providing trainings to the principles and criteria of better cotton and also organic cotton production since 2020 here. And both standards were back then new in Uzbekistan when we started our activities. And now, as you already heard for Corinne, we have the first licenses for better cotton in the country, and we also have already some areas that are under EU organic cotton certification. Most recently, we also started to work on the introduction of regenerative agricultural practices, and I saw that there was also a question on that in the chat or the Q&A. So I'm really happy to elaborate a bit further on that later. In the field of processing, so second part, we have started to provide basic trainings on international social and environmental standards together with Amfori on VSCI and BPI. And we also conducted a study on wastewater management and provided some recommendations for the companies, but also for the governmental agencies on how to improve the industry in this regard. We are also supported by the Fair Labor Association Fair Labor Organization. Sorry, now I'm was confused with the name. And you just heard a lot about the project from Nisha. So it's all about introducing grievance mechanisms, first in selected clusters here, and then also spreading into more clusters. One of our recent activities was also to provide trainings on international sustainability standards and certifications in the sector, and I will come back to this point when I talk about the opportunities and challenges. Last but not least, we also support the industry to get market access, especially, of course, to the European market, for example, by partnering with international buying companies or also by training people here in Uzbekistan on things like sales management and also how to prepare for an international textile fair. As you might know, Uzbekistan also received the GSP Plus status now until 2027. And we are also providing some capacity building on how to use this status. And I mean, as you know, as you might know, there are also attached a lot of international requirements that need to be adhered to if you want to keep the standards. So it's also a good push in terms of social and environmental standards. We already heard a lot about the progress made and the opportunities that might arise from that. And I have the opportunity and the challenge to go last, and I try not to repeat everything, but can you maybe go to the next slide, please? So I was also asked to highlight some opportunities that we see from our experience here during the last 5 years. And I actually noted down 4 main points that I would like to highlight. The first one was already mentioned by others, which is that there is an opportunity by the cluster system that is used here per se, because it offers a high potential for traceability. And also, if you are bound to the European or German supply chain due diligence laws, or in general, if you want to work more on a traceable system, then of course it's also a huge opportunity to have the whole supply chain in one country and not spreading across multiple countries and maybe even world regions. Another opportunity that was already mentioned by Raluca and also Corinne is that the industry is quite a young one. So that means that they're still developing, and you can still use the chance to be an early mover and influence social and environmental conditions right from the beginning, and also bring your own requirements with you at an early stage by supporting capacity building in the companies. This is also an area where we are partnering with some companies already. And you also heard from Mr. Haidarov that there's also high willingness of the industry actually to work on this issue. So I think that's a huge opportunity. Then really shortly to say, there's huge potential also to source organic and better cotton from Uzbekistan in the future. For organic, it is growing and the demand is also growing. So it's a market that is not yet, not yet everything is taken up by international brands. So there's still an opportunity to invest in that. And also for better cotton, they are working with the hard identity preserved system. So you can actually get traceable better cotton from Uzbekistan and only traceable better cotton. So I think that's also a huge opportunity in this regard. And last but not least, there is a high potential for cooperation with international organizations that are already working here in Uzbekistan. So I think the most important, or some of the most important, are presented here. And there are also, I mean, if you look into like the implementation, then you also see that some of the clusters of the vertically integrated enterprises, they're part of Better Cotton, but they're also part of Better Work. So you have the option to also work with the whole supply chain in one country, in one enterprise, and with the standards that are helping you in order to make sure that there's an adherence to social and environmental standards. So I will keep it there because I think I'm running out of time, but in general, I think that makes a huge opportunity to cooperate with these organizations that are already here, are already working with the industry, and we are all very open also for partnerships. I can say for GIZ that we have a lot of partnerships with companies, and a lot of them are approaching us also if they want to start sourcing here in Uzbekistan. So yeah, we will share our contact details at the end, I guess. And I will also share for your information a reference report on the industry in a chat, or ask Richard to send it later because I think I cannot do it. But yeah.
Yes.
So
Thank you,
thank you.
Gina. Yes, thank you, Gina, and thank you to all the panelists. What I would like to turn, and I can see the Q&A section really, getting worked up. And we have talked about, of course, Uzbekistan, is something which companies should explore. But of course, they should explore with wise eyes wide open. So what I would like to turn here, and I would request all our panelists to be very, very short because we only have 20 minutes left. But if you can also look through the questions, that are already in the chat. But the one question I'll pose to all of the panelists, and we'll go in the same, way, starting from Raluca, finishing on Gina. Again, please keep it very short. What are some of the challenges that you continue to observe, and what could be some of the solutions? And I can see, of course, some of it is around the Fair Labor Working Practices, the regulation in terms of German Supply Chain Act, organic ROC. So if you could please talk about the challenges, but also, take the questions which are already in chat if you want to address those, but keep it very, very short. 2-minute pitch. We start with Raluca.
Thanks, Richa. Okay, if you give me 2 minutes, I cannot even talk about how grateful I am that everybody's keen to cooperate with everybody to lift the industry. So we'll leave that on the side for the closing comments. If you put up quickly my presentation, I had there a slide which I think it's really critical when we talk in terms of challenges for sourcing. Here, I just want to share with you very quickly the key findings of independent civil society monitoring of last year's harvest, the 2023 harvest in Uzbekistan. This civil society monitoring is independent. It was conducted by human rights organization Uzbek Forum, who's been doing this every year since 2010. And they are actually the ones that in 2021, found that indeed there was no systemic state-imposed forced labor in the harvest. And as a result of that, we lifted the pledge as the cotton campaign. But very quickly, until you guys fix up the tech issues, when the slide is up, you'll see that what the findings show is that actually the system still turns to forced labor when it's under stress, when it's under pressure. In 2023, in districts with a shortage of voluntary pickers, so where there were not enough people willing to pick cotton voluntary, local officials still resorted to forced labor by forcing some employees of several state organizations to pick cotton or to pay for a replacement picker. And just to be clear, the central government continues to have a clear policy that prohibits forced labor, and that's absolutely great, and everybody's recognizing that. The problem is that there's also a very strong administrative and command and control system that actually incentivized government officials at district level to do resort to forced labor. So that's one of the key issues we have to address moving forward, this part of continued government control of the harvest and the persistence of de facto cotton production plans. Then a second challenge we should really discuss how to address together is the fact that farmers have little to no bargaining power before the clusters, right, the cotton companies to whom they sell their cotton. And it was mentioned already before, there's this lack of functioning grievance mechanisms and freedom of association protections, which are not, unfortunately, just at the cotton sector level, but also at state organizations, because that's why, employees in the state organizations could not resist coercion in last year's harvest to go to the fields or pay for a replacement picker. And again, I'm not saying, the findings don't say that forced labor was widespread or systemic, but they do show that it happened in districts with a shortage of voluntary pickers. And very quickly, if we move to the next slide to wrap up my intervention, it's really important, like, what do these findings really tell us, right? And the question on everybody's lips is, where do we go from here and what does it mean for the brands? And I would really link this back to the first part of my presentation when we were talking about the brands' obligations. And I'd just like to reiterate once more that, when we're talking about independent monitoring, worker-driven mechanisms for grievance and remedy, the workers are really key here because they are really the ones that are best placed to identify, to report violations, and to advocate for improving their working conditions. And this has actually been recognized, time and again by industry and labor actors, including at the OECD Forum, which I'm sure some of you have watched already. On Wednesday, the forum opened with a key session showing how workers and their independent representatives can work together with employers and brands to build together mechanisms for prevention and remedy of violations in the workplace. So again, on the brand side, I know the big question is, the pledge has been lifted, these efforts are going on the ground, should brands start sourcing? And to be honest, I think everybody who's paying close attention to the context and its understanding, not just the context in Uzbekistan, but the global context, will realize that this is not just a yes or no question. It's more of a how type of question, right? Like, how can brands start sourcing, or under what conditions should brands start sourcing? And I'll just wrap up by saying that we, as the Cotton Campaign Coalition, we are encouraging our pledge signatories to consider responsible sourcing from Uzbekistan, and we are proactively developing the concept of a pilot program for responsible sourcing, so that together with our brand partners and other partners that are interested in Uzbekistan, we can first identify and expand good labor practices at suppliers, and we can work together to establish these worker-led mechanisms we've been talking about to identify, prevent, and use brand leverage to remediate labor abuses. So if you're a brand who's interested in learning more about this program and who's interested in Uzbekistan, feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my contact info in the chat.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Radhika. And as you said, it's not about yes or no, it's about how. Here I would like to bring in Mr. Khairov again for your last remarks. And I see few questions actually addressed to you in terms of, how these big small businesses and craftsmen can be trained, how market linkages could be improved. There are questions around how do you, balance domestic demand versus export oriented. And most importantly, what role you can play in terms of decent work, which is, of course, business and human rights, which is the topic. So last few remarks from you, please.
Thank you very much. And I will start with your first question about what is a challenge. The main challenge which I see today is awareness. We are trying, and we are appreciating all of you, because you are spreading information about Uzbekistan, spreading information about how we are reforming, how we are moving towards being closer. But we are still seeing lack of awareness of all our potential partners outside of Uzbekistan, international big brands, etc., etc. We have already about asking how. We have already concluded businesses with high-profile brands. They're enjoying good product from Uzbekistan at very competitive price. I don't want to name their names, do not make advertisement. I responded to Cotton Campaign already in writing about their concern, which is, of course, it cannot be in one night or overnight to meet all challenges. But we are moving, and everybody recognizing that we are moving. There are perception still which is kept in mind of all I would say Western world, that yes, if it is former Soviet Union, they have to have some challenges with being open or with being something. But now it is over. It was said that we are open to have any comments at our reform. We are ready to meet any of them and to comply. And I have responded 4 questions which was there in question and answers. And of course, we keep doing training, keep doing seminars. We keep trying to bring our small and medium enterprises to bigger exhibition, bigger event. And I'm sure that to bring about 500 brands, retailers, sourcing companies to Uzbekistan in September, it makes them encourage to work with those standard named with international labor standard, with international environment standard. With this, I would like to stop and to repeat that we are open to any question and we will respond accordingly. Thank you very much to Fair Labor for this outstandingly good platform. Thank you.
Thank you. And very well said. It's just not creating awareness in Uzbekistan, it's also creating awareness outside of Uzbekistan and how both sides are open-minded. Corinne, any last, thoughts about the challenges or any of the questions you would like to take from the Q&A?
Yeah, thanks, Risha. So yeah, we're tight on time, so I'll restrict myself to a few points. I mean, I think critically, and we've heard quite a lot of this, ensuring that there is what we would describe as an appropriate enabling environment in Uzbekistan is one of the most important aspects for all of us to focus on. And, this means continuing to build upon the excellent progress that I talked about earlier from the government of Uzbekistan, as well as the broader multi-stakeholder engagement. So this will really help to ensure that all of the critical or difficult issues can be brought up, openly discussed, and then appropriate resolutions agreed upon, and hopefully properly acted upon. And for us as a farm level standard, our main focus will be on ensuring that the various elements pertaining to this are being properly addressed. So that's a very high level one, but also it reflects what is unique about Uzbekistan. What has been achieved already is very much as a result of those efforts and that structure. And just to give you a very sort of quick concrete example, a very specific challenge that we see and we face relates to the current shortage of sort of qualified independent verifiers that are available in country to assess the work on the ground, and in particular, a lack of available independent, decent work monitors. We heard a little bit about that earlier. And that very much impacts and will continue to limit our ability to scale the Better Cotton program at speed, whilst maintaining that very crucial element of credibility. And it may mean that necessarily we have to expand at a slightly slower speed than we would like until constraints such as that are adequately resolved. Then sort of long term, it's worth mentioning that I think beyond the current very much sort of donor supported environment, we're going to need to have a country level sort of financing mechanism in place, which is there to support all of the work, both at field level and beyond. This is an area that we've discussed, for example, with Uztextil and others, and we'll need all of the cotton sector in Uzbekistan to get behind this, to ensure that there is a concerted approach and that this good work and momentum that's been built up doesn't suddenly stop or falter. And then maybe just sort of as a final point, and perhaps somewhat ironically perhaps as well, I think we need to be aware and mindful of sort of pushing ahead and increasing supply, in our case of Better Cotton, in line with the actual demand, and that's been touched on. Currently, that's arguably quite limited. We've heard that there are a large number of retailers and brands that are sort of looking to actively buy, but getting some of them over the line, getting those first transactions done, building confidence is the big element there. I think that's a critical area that we see needs to be resolved. We're doing our bit to engage with retailers and brands on that, but it needs again to be a concerted effort. They're looking for reassurance, as we heard. They need to know that they can fit in and comply with the legislation that was outlined to us earlier. And I think there are positive, tangible signs that it's growing, but certainly we realize that this is not something we can take for granted. Let me leave it there. I can answer one, or I can respond to one question that came from Abby McGill that was just asking how the issues relating to international trade unions and whether they're deemed independent, how do challenges affect our compliance mechanisms. I can't talk so much about the labour unions themselves. What I can say is that, you know, we find, you know, one of the particular challenges is ensuring that all of the clusters we work with are in compliance along the lines of ensuring that their workers are given sort of free open access to either sort of trade unions or to other worker representatives. Some do this better than others. It's definitely an ongoing area of challenge. So maybe just from our side, there's a little bit of perspective, and you know, it has been the cause for licenses not being issued in the past as well. So yeah, just something there to ponder. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Corinne. I'm directly going to move to Yusuf and, you know, take the questions that are in the chat, but also what's your opinion on challenges? And then followed by Nisha and Gina, please.
Thank you so much. I'll be very quick. So I have two challenges that I see that we need to be considered. One of them is actually to the readiness of the industry to go to the next step. I think all we see, and also in the industry and also enterprise, they are doing whatever they could do to improve their compliance status and improve their working condition. But we also need to look into the skill of the worker, not only the worker, also mid-level manager. So I think to realize all the potential opportunities that we discussed in earlier, we also need to make sure that we have given enough resource and time to skill our worker and also middle management managers on level standard. And secondly, I think we all talk about branding image of Uzbekistan. I think we have to give some sort of effort, event like this today, thanks to a fair labor association having this event, that will help to not only talk about what is happening in the industry, but also we can pick some of the good story to tell, and then that can change the whole narrative around Uzbekistan. I think we have to give this kind of good case, good business scenario to the external world, so that they can feel more comfortable doing business in Uzbekistan, and also feel free to put their mark as made in Uzbekistan. I think that's what we can work together as a team in Uzbekistan and also beyond Uzbekistan. Over. Thank you.
Nisha, go ahead.
Thank you, Richa. I'll be very quick as well. I would like to jump straight to the three most prominent challenges that we've faced during our work in Uzbekistan. Firstly is that in terms of grievance mechanism, there's a lack of female representatives in the grievance committee. This is really important because there are some grievances that are sensitive and gender specific, and that's really important to have gender balance in your grievance committee to ensure that every worker is comfortable to put forward their grievances. Secondly, almost at every cluster that we visited, the grievances were handled by top management. This is because there's a lack of escalation pathway, which we then introduced. What we realized is that all grievances are sent directly to top management, and top management will handle and resolve those grievances. So what we want to see is a grievance committee, and the top management should only be brought in. They should only be involved when the grievance is beyond the capacity of the grievance committee. And even then, the escalation pathway is so important because there are some grievances that are, for example, that has criminal elements or sexual in nature. These are grievances that are beyond the capacity of the company or enterprise and should be handled by experts or the authorities. So that's another challenge that we saw, and we've sort of introduced the escalation pathway for them to, include external parties into their grievance mechanism. And thirdly, and most importantly, is that grievances are still looked at as something really negative in Uzbekistan by the companies. In their head, if you receive grievances, that means you're doing something wrong. There's something wrong with your company. The aim is to not have grievances. That couldn't be further away from the truth. When you receive grievances from your workers, it means that you have a grievance mechanism that your workers trust, and they're comfortable to put forward their grievances. And companies need to look at this as something positive, from a positive light. Take those grievances, use that as an opportunity to improve your standards, improve the working conditions of your workers, which will then build upon the employer-employee relationship, which can be very beneficial for enterprises. So I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Nisha. Gina.
Yes, so very short on the point, two main challenges. So one is the exposure and hence also the knowledge of international standards regarding sustainability, but also sometimes quality and export requirements, which is due to the fact that Uzbekistan was not so much exposed to the international markets, let's say like 6, 7, 8 years ago. So quite new topic. We are working on that with the help of the capacity building measures that I described before. And the second one, which is quite interlinked, is also, it was also already mentioned, the lack of trust and confidence in the sector by international buying companies. And so far, we have no really big international brands who are communicating about their interest or their sourcing from Uzbekistan. So it seems that everyone has to be waiting for the first mover, which is understandable. But on the other hand, the first mover will also be able to really influence the adherence to international standards. And yeah, I think that's also a huge opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. And we are really at time, but I do want to just summarize very, very quickly in 1 minute. What everyone is saying is just not the responsibility of one stakeholder. The responsibility, retailers have a responsibility, brands have a responsibility, the Textile Association has a responsibility, the clusters, the workers, all the organizations around the table has a responsibility. And this is a country where after so many years, we have the opportunity to make it an idle sourcing location, but we have to all work together. And I see a lot of openness. And with that, I'm going to thank our panelists. They have done a tremendous job. I didn't give them enough time to talk about in the end, but hopefully this is not the last conversation. We will continue to have this platform. Next time, we will even have more in-depth conversation on key topic areas. So with that, very, very thankful to all the panelists and to all the people who attended the webinar. And we hope to continue this dialogue, in future. Thank you all and have a good day. Bye.
Thank you for the great
Thank
moderation,
you.
Richa.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.